Yes. Okay, Rachel, well, welcome to the Holy Roast podcast, this sort of ministry outreach of the Kentucky Board of Ordained Ministry, here just trying to encourage and equip our local leaders in Kentucky right now and beyond. So kind of first geared toward clergy, but honestly, just any lay leader right now who's dreaming about the future of the United Methodist Church and what we could be. And so we're just so excited that you're here. Thank you for making the time to chat with us today. So for those we'll have a little introduction, in your bio, but for those folks that don't know who you are, I know that you've been a local church pastor, you're an ordained elder, you've been a church planter, you've worked for Path One, but can you share a bit about where you're serving in ministry right now?
Sure, yeah. So it's so great to be with you as someone who went to Asbury, met my husband at Asbury College, right? That's my Kentucky connection.
Yes,
with family in Lexington and Louisville and Shelbyville. But I went on to Duke and am now super happy and loving being in a Western jurisdiction. And I'm serving as the director of New and Vital Faith for the Desert Southwest Annual Conference. So we are, I think, probably the smallest annual conference in Methodism. We have like 150 churches, and we cover territory, though. It's a large region from Las Vegas, Nevada, all the way down to the border in Tucson, Arizona, with a part of Winter Haven, California as well. So basically I help start new churches, and then I help existing churches do new things.
Wonderful.
That's awesome. I didn't know, and Rachel, this is the first time I think we've met. And so I'm honored to be surrounded by Rachels today.
Yeah, we're pretty cool.
The Rob and the Rachels. I think that's really great. But I didn't know the Duke connection too. So but the question is, are you a Duke fan then by going there, or are you a fan of some other place?
Oh no, Duke for sure.
Okay, good.
100%.
Good.
100%. Well, I was so bummed I didn't make it to the Final Four because I could have seen him here in Phoenix, right? Like, come on. It would have been amazing.
You
So
gotta talk to John Shire about
bummer. What a bummer.
Yeah. Grayson Allen plays for the Phoenix Suns. Yes, total Blue Devil fan. Love it.
Oh, wow, that's right. Yeah. So is there a bit of travel to your job? I didn't realize just quite the territory that your conference covers. So I imagine you get to see a lot of the southwestern area.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I love the drive from Phoenix to Vegas and going through, seeing the desert, Joshua Trees, say hi to the, Hoover Dam on my way by. So it's pretty remote. Make sure you have plenty of gas in your car at all times. But I do. I love traveling, connecting with churches, so big, small, everything in between. Yeah, I love it. It's been exciting.
That's wonderful. So. I'm so happy for you. So I was telling Rob, we first met because I was appointed to be the lead pastor at Revolution Church almost 5 years ago now. And at the time, my church was only 9 years old. They didn't quite, still qualify as a new church start. They'd been chartered and all the things and financially independent, but I knew enough to know this is going to be a little different. This is my first gig as being a lead pastor, and they're only 9 years old, and I'll be their second pastor ever and their first female pastor. And I thought, I'm going to need some help. Like I would love some coaching, and so I had like a list of folks that I reached out to and sort of interviewed. And at the time, Rachel Gilmore was doing coaching for church planters. And I remember early in one of our conversations, me going, but I'm not a planter. Like, that's not an identity. I've not been trained. I've not, done any of the things, this is just where the bishop has appointed me. And you very much welcomed me in to this sort of like network of planters that you were beginning. You invited me on all the things and you coached me. And over time, I sort of realized, okay, yes, like, this is different. This is a unique situation, and I can learn a lot from this community. But during that time, I heard you say something so very wise, and it was basically like, we should all be thinking like church planters. And so, kind of getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm wondering, like, what are some common misconceptions that people might have about like church planting today? Kind of like I did coming in, like, oh, it's not me. Yeah, and anything that you kind of come across of these kind of myths or misconceptions when it comes to planting.
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. So I would say, you brought up kind of the first myth, and that's that not everyone can start new things, and it's just not true, right? We all, especially COVID taught us, right? And now we can all plant digital churches. We can go online and pivot. So everyone can start something new, but we're not all called to start like a multi-site or a Sunday-centric, move into a town with no church and start one overnight. Maybe that's not everybody's calling, but my gosh, there are so many opportunities, and we are called to use our gifts and the right team in the right context to reach new people in new ways, right? Like it's the only way we're going to kind of get out of the plateau or struggles of our current church existence. So one common misconception is that like only young white guys with skinny jeans and cool hair can plant churches. That's probably another misconception. Yeah. And that's what I loved about you, Rachel. And I remembered our first phone call and you're like, but I'm a mom. And I'm like, I'm a mom too. Like who knew that? Because that was the thing I heard when I was appointed in 2009, right out of Duke. My first appointment was to start a church. I'd never heard of church planting. And I was like, what is this? Do we need more churches? It's Virginia. They got plenty of churches in the South. I have a 6-month-old son. My husband's a full-time pastor. And they said, welcome to Itineracy, plant or you don't have a job. And I said, I will plant for Jesus, right? But I heard at my boot camp that women don't really plant and mothers never plant. So learn what you can, but don't take it personally if your church plant fails, right? So I'm like an Enneagram 3 and I'm like challenge accepted. And so 10 years later, we had hundreds of people, preschools, food ministries, all that kind of stuff. So, with God, all things are possible. But I will say another misconception I hear in the church planting world is, and this comes from my friend Derek Jacobs, who's a planter in the North Texas Conference. We hear, just work smarter, not harder. And that is not true. So if you are actually doing a church plant, starting a brand new faith community alongside another church by yourself, online, whatever, it is so hard and requires a lot of time. So boundaries are important. Time off is important. But if you're the kind of person, I once was working with someone who deeply desired to be a church planter, but they really felt like God had told them they shouldn't work Saturdays or Sundays after 12 or any weeknight. And I'm like, you might not even be called to ministry. I don't know. But church planting is going to be really tough, and so you have gifts, use them, but maybe not in this way at this time. So, and I would say the last kind of fallacy of church planting is that sustainability and effectiveness are the same thing. So like when you start a new church, maybe it's not sustainable. Maybe 5-7 years later, it closes, but you were still effective. Like you have impacted lives. People are different and they know God's love because of you. Similarly, we have a lot of sustainable churches out there that are not effective, right? So you got to look at those two things kind of in tandem and say, how can I do both? Am I called to do both? How can I celebrate the journey I'm on?
Yeah.
So, those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah. No, I love that and that's like sort of shifting the narrative of, we often think that if a church closes, or especially if it's a new start and it doesn't survive the transition of the planting pastor or something like that it's a failure. Right. And we I think that because we can get kind of caught up in our own success, our own like ego driven impact, that it was me and not the Lord's work and the impact that you had in the kingdom, and, that it goes far beyond even what we can kind of see all at once. And so that really leads me to my next question of like, how do you measure the impact of an effective new church plant? Like, help us with some of those conversations of like, what does that, maybe we'll start with effective, like what does that look like, or how can we faithfully measure it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a great question. So I can tell you, being around the church planting world for like 15 years now, some of their common metrics are effectiveness when you're first starting out is meeting like 40 new people a month and getting some kind of contact info, which sounds very overwhelming. In some of our contexts, that might mean you meet the entire town within your first 6 months, right? So just meeting lots and lots of people. And then you want to grow what you call a launch team or a core team. And that needs to be at least 4 up to 8 people for larger new church starts. Obviously, you want a larger team of folks because you'll have more elements to whatever you're doing. And then a difference we've seen in the last few years is it depends on what kind of thing you're planting. Is it a Sunday-centric, worship-oriented church plant, or is it a non-Sunday-centric, like dinner church or house church or spiritual entrepreneurship, where you start a coffee shop and the people you meet, as the barista become your congregation? You know what I mean? So then you have like a choose your own adventure book of what the benchmarks are based on what it is you're trying to create. But ultimately, I think whatever it is you're trying to do, I ask all of my planters a few things every month when we check in. What's working? What's not? What do you need? And most importantly, what's being transformed, right? So when it comes to effectiveness or sustainability, the narrative of like lives that are changed or kids that aren't going to bed hungry anymore, whatever it might be, that community impact, that faith impact, and then the community impact are what I would look to most in church planting, because like tithes and offerings will never again be enough to sustain a thriving, growing church, right? We just know that. We'll need to rent out our spaces or have grants or some other, be co-vocational in some way. All of these are like the things we fear, right? But we're seeing it. It's happening. Yeah. And I have kids that are Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and they're not going to be big tithers or big earners anytime soon. So how do we kind of pivot and think about sustainability differently without it being like a big mega church? Because that's another fad that we see losing traction in our spiritual landscape today. So your goal should not necessarily be butts in seats, as they talk about, but lives that are transformed, people that are sharing about you and your impact. Social media I use social media metrics for a lot of my planters. Like, you're posting, that's great, but are people engaging? So look at, I guess my answer is there's no really easy answer, right? Because we want to be really contextual based on what you're starting and what to look for. But bottom line, transformation and growth in some ways, based on what it is you're doing.
I love that.
Yeah.
There was, when I was at a Exponential in Orlando just a few years ago, it still felt like they were so circled around the 3 B's, right? The kind of the butts and the buildings and the budget, right? Mm-hmm. And it was what effective success looks like. And I just thought, I think it was right before the pandemic. It was in 2020. I just knew I was going to a new congregation, and I was in the transitional period, and they were starting to shut things down. And I was like, what is going on? We're still figuring out what COVID is like. I think it was like February. But I was almost discouraged because I thought, man, these are going to be different ways of thinking, especially when it comes to revitalization and new church plants. And I love the language you're using here about that transformation impact, because I think no matter if you are a new church start or you're in a downtown church or a rural community, transformation and impact is far more interesting to me, at least, than the butts and the budget and the buildings, like, what are you actually doing rather than just collecting items? It's not Pokemon, right? We don't need to collect them all. But what are we doing to actually impact the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven? So thank you so much. I can't wait to write that down.
Write that down,
because I think, gosh, that's far more faithful sounding to me than the alternative.
Yeah, like what's being transformed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so much, I think the pressure that we feel as local clergy, it revolves around butts, buildings, and budget, right? Like it revolves around these numbers, and we can get so sort of tied up in that, especially, that if you've been serving the same church, sort of before COVID and after. I remember how many were there before, and I remember how many came back that very first Sunday in 2020 for in-person worship. And it's like, okay, we've got to come up with different metrics here. Of what success looks like.
All our butts are gone.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I know. You brought it up.
No, actually, this Rachel did first, okay?
Okay.
I'll put that out.
I forgot.
Let the record show.
Yeah, we're on the same team here. It's Rachel and I versus... but just, I love that question. Is so beautiful to frame what's being transformed. And, we are also millennials. And I would say even for our generation, like they don't tithe, like I think a lot of my, sort of millennials in my community are very, very generous, but they give to like 10 different causes that they are passionate about. And so they give to a mission they believe in. But like, so they're 10% or whatever they're willing for charitable giving. It's split. Yes, they give to the church, but it's also split with like 10 other things. Right. And that's sort of beautiful in a way that's the way they've discerned to live out their Christian witness. But it's also a challenge to church of like, okay, those are missions that they see are actually having an impact in their community. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I remember you bringing up to me, like, we're talking about sustainability moving forward. Like you have to have other sources of income other than just Sunday morning generosity, because the farther we go down this road in time, like that's just going to continue to decrease. And that can sound really overwhelming for folks, right, who've been taught and trained to do it a certain way. But you were, an early voice for me that's like, I don't even know if you have any openings right now for coaching, but y'all listening, if y'all are in need of a church planting coach, like you will not meet a better cheerleader, a better person that makes you think that you can take on the world and do anything for Jesus than Rachel Gilmore.
Link in bio to contact.
Yes, that's right. Then those early years in ministry at Revolution for me were, oh my word, incredible. But I remember, that's something that you talked about of like, doing things differently and being that church innovator. And like, it's not just you in this unique ministry context that it's called to this, but all of us need to be thinking this way because church has dramatically changed for a myriad of reasons, least of which the pandemic or the social political landscape that we've lived through the past 5+ years, right? The way that people gather, what they're looking for, things have changed. And so here in Kentucky, it's pretty diverse, right? We have everything from Western Kentucky rural, and we have urban centers. We have Appalachia.
We have haulers, I've heard.
We have haulers. They're beautiful places.
Still figuring out what that is, yeah.
And so, kind of thinking more of like the church revitalization, because I don't know how many people are doing like the parachute drop church plant anymore, right? There's different pathways. Don't do it. There are different pathways that we sort of take now, but I'm wondering, how can just the everyday pastor like Rob and I here, we're kind of in a suburban context, but we have lots of different contexts here in Kentucky. How can we embrace our local leaders, this sort of spirit of church innovation? And is there any like word of encouragement that you might have in that vein?
Yes. So I am kind of like a cheerleader. I love encouraging people. And I would say, my first tip is making sure that you're rested and you're okay, because COVID was so hard on so many of us that a lot of clergy, I know a lot of my friends, right? They're on the brink of burnout. They're like, I am not okay. I have been over functioning for so many years. We have another political election coming. There's some group of Methodists hanging out in North Carolina right now, making some decisions. And there's, we're not okay. So let's name the fact that we're not okay. Take care of ourselves a little bit, because we can't really be creative when we're over functioning, right? So we can't even be inspired to innovate if like we're, empty and exhausted. So take care of yourself and create some boundaries that are healthy for you. I just read a book by Adam Grant called Hidden Potential about the importance of scaffolding and how any of us can achieve anything with the right framework in place. So find that team, like you said, and remind them that the goal is to fail, not to succeed, right? To kind of normalize fear a little bit and be like, let's fail fast. Let's fail forward and learn with it. And so whatever it is that you're trying to do new, to innovate, to reach new people, my other little scientific tidbit to encourage you is sometimes we're at a church and we're like, oh my gosh, I have a new idea for a different kind of VBS or a different fundraiser or to start a co-working space in our fellowship hall, but no one's going to say yes. And, everyone's going to vote it down. Church council won't vote unanimously. Well, the bell curve of innovation tells us that you need 6% of people to be your early adopters. So once you have 6% of the church on board, then it leads to your next tier of early innovators. And that's like another 13%. So if you can get 18% of your church average worship attendance, not membership, which for some of us is like 2 or 3 people, right? If you can get 2 or 3 people in your church that like this idea, that's actually enough to turn the tide and to innovate and do something new. So don't be afraid to move forward thinking you don't have 100% buy-in, because you won't get there. Start with 6%, right? And then the same is true. 6% of people will always be the laggards or the never adopters, late adopters. So you will always have critics. It doesn't matter what you think you're trying. You know, Bertha is going to complain till the day we celebrate her in the funeral. Like, it just, don't try to convince and win over everybody. So those are some of the tips. And really work together. Know that you're not alone. Listen to these podcasts. Reach out. Ideate together. So yeah. I'm actually, after this call, I rented out a big Airbnb for 15 clergy, and we're just going to hang out there for 2 days, share ideas, make meals together, rest, and be creative. So, yeah.
I guess we lost that invite, Rachel.
Listen,
see it come through.
I have been invited to one of those, Rob. I'm sorry. She did it for a female planter thing, but then COVID kind of canceled it. But it's okay. It was still wonderful. We just moved it online. I did get the invite.
Okay,
yes.
A little humble brag here. I got invited.
Yeah, that's right. The humble brag. Yeah.
Rachel's awesome. You're too, Rob. I met you. You'll be invited in subsequent events.
Okay,
I'm sure
yeah,
we'll have ways to engage.
I'm in somewhere. That's awesome. I wonder, things have just changed, the landscape, and you named a lot of those things that are changing, and they're going to continue to change, right? I mean, that's the part of this thing is, and we've made jokes about millennials already. We're part of that great group of people. But we've never known a world that isn't changing too. And I think that's something that we have as a power, is we are used to change. And although we may go to comfortability, so I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm not speaking for everybody here, but as 7s in the room, we can. Change is okay. It's exciting. It can move forward. It can sometimes be extremely exhausting. So I want to say thank you for that. We can't be on the go and hustling all the time and expect some things to happen when we're just dry and we're just, sleep deprived as a part of it all and burnt out. But part of this is our social contexts are continuing to change. Whether we are in a rural area, those areas are changing. In urban, suburban, and the community just looks very different than it did before, even in our lifetime of being not just church pastors, but people who, my entry in the church was in high school, so I didn't grow up in the church, but like if you did grow up in the church, it's all very different. But I think that change is just escalating, and it's going pretty quicker. So how do we... what do we do? And maybe not even just as pastors, but local church leaders, when that community and how we define community is ever evolving, what can we do to foster it?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a great question, because, for the first time in U.S. history, the majority of Christians don't identify, or the majority of Americans don't identify as being part of a faith community, what Christianity or Judaism or Islam. We also know that nationally now the average church has fewer than 65 people, right? But the average church where folks sense a call into ministry has more than 250 people. So we have fewer people being called into ministry. Post-COVID, as we mentioned, maybe 50 to 70% of folks have come back. It might be higher if you're in a rural area and it's like 3 dynasties in your pews, and so they all do return from their holler or wherever. But families are not coming back to church, and they used to be our bread and butter. And in the church growth movement, a seeker movement, it was like, get a band, get a sign, everyone will build it and they will come, right? All of that has changed. And while it's scary, I am so excited about this change, because I think it gives us the freedom to be our authentic selves, to use our gifts, to look at our context. So, so my advice would be, and maybe it's because I'm out in the desert Southwest now and I'm mindful of like all the, literally at this street, like 2 streets away from me, is called Indian School Road, because that's where all the Indian schools were, where we forced our indigenous siblings to have their hair cut and be colonized. So to try to decolonize or be post-colonial in our church practices, I would say the first step is to just go and listen in your community. Like depending on the size of it, this might be more fun in certain towns than others, but I call it the Ask Three Challenge, where you ask three people at places that are within a 10-minute drive of the church, hey, I'm looking for a church to go to on a Sunday. What would you recommend and why? And just see, do they even know your church exists? What are you known for? Again, back to that transformation piece, right? Or what church are they talking about? What are they doing that's really exciting, folks? I did this once in North Carolina at the gas station near the church, and the guy's like, oh my gosh, Bethany United Methodist Church is the best church ever. You have to go there. The pastor's amazing. And I'm like, I'm Pastor Rachel. I've been there a year. It's so nice to meet you, right? But I loved his answer. He was a big fan of me, and we had never met. That told me a lot. And I was out here in Arizona in a really rural community, and I asked that same question at the Dollar General to the cashier. And she's like, well, you wanted them Lutherans or Catholics or non-denoms? And I'm like, I don't know. Just show me what's out there. She's like, come with me. And she leaves a line at the Dollar General to walk me in the parking lot. And she's like, 2 blocks that way, you got the Catholics. Then you go over 2 streets, and that's where the Lutherans are. And then all the cars in front of that's the non-denom. And I'm like, what about that white building right there? She's like, well, I'll be. That might be another church. And that was a Methodist church, right? But that told me a lot. Like, and then I was like, well, where do you go to church? Oh, I don't do church. But like she knew, right? So listen to your community. Ask them, like, where would you go? Why? What are your needs? Spend some time doing that. And then the church has for decades and maybe our entire existence here in the States felt like we have to be the host of everything. So my job is to fill up the church calendar with programming. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are over programmed. We are not okay, because not only did people not come back post-COVID, but our volunteers did not come back. So even if, Joe is back on Sunday mornings, he does not want to be the usher anymore or brew coffee every single week like he used to. So we need to stop expecting people will show up at the church and start going out to where they're already meeting. So if that means that we are out at the football game, for the community, or we're joining the book club at the library, or we're at the park meeting other moms with young kids, like we need to learn the art of being a guest again, being invited into other spaces to learn about the lives of our neighbors, so that when spiritual needs arise for them or conversations arise, we're prepared and we have that relationship to build upon. Because that's the main shift we're seeing, especially with younger generations, is they don't feel like the church is really relevant or has anything to offer them necessarily. So until they know that you are authentic and that you authentically care, and you're not showing up at the book club to be coercive and manipulative and ask them to invite them to turn or burn and come to church, right? Like none of that is the agenda here. But when they know you truly love and care about them, and that faith has made a difference in your life and God's love has transformed you, then they're more open to hearing about it. So spending time listening, just being a guest in other spaces, and then being prepared and ready to share your faith in ways that make sense to folks that don't think the church has a lot of valuable resources or hope to offer them. Those would kind of be my tips for churches or pastors right now that are trying to reach out in this new era of faith.
That's so good.
So helpful.
So when I came to faith in another denomination outside the United Methodist Church. And I remember when I first became United Methodist was in college, and I worked at a camp, right? I worked at United Methodist summer camp in Florida, and it was a fantastic experience. Loved it. But the whole time I thought while I was there, this is nothing like the summer camp I went to when I was in a different denomination. So part of my story, I grew up extremely evangelical when I went through that, and extremely conservative traditionalist, whatever language you want to use, but more so that turn and burn language was second nature. Like I remember I went to a Bible Institute for summer camp. I'll tell you one thing. So I could memorize tons of Bible verses, and we would go and save people. In Tarpon Springs is a beautiful area of Florida. There's a place called the Sponge Docks, and on the Sponge Docks is where they would drop all the summer campers off and see if we can evangelize amongst the groups, right? So we'd have all these different tools, and we'd have Romans Road and things that we could lead people to Jesus, right? And when we got back, whichever group had the most salvations would get a ice cream party, right? That That was the most fun we had. And it was, learn from that and deconstruct from that along the way. But part of, man, you are giving a beautiful tool of evangelism, because I do think there's part of us that needs to redeem what it means to, not, I don't want to, evangelicals is now taking on a different kind of word, but ways that we are able to share our faith in healthy ways and connect with people in very genuine and authentic ways. And so these examples you're giving to us, I'm like, yeah, gosh, I wish I was given that toolkit when I was first becoming a Christian on this way, because I would have gone through a lot less trauma that way. But I think that could be so much more accessible and faithful to not just pastors to practice what you just said, but for our lay folks to say, hey, it doesn't mean when you go into book club, the next second you introduce yourself as like, hey, I go to this church, you need to come to church with me, because if you don't, blah, blah, blah is going to happen, right? But that's been the model, right, for a lot of our unfortunately also brothers and sisters who are currently doing that, and that's what our culture and our society receives from Christians, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think is it Matt Majowski that says he prefers the word invitational, sort of, yes, this sort of evangelical spirit. That word means a whole lot of different things now, but getting at the heart of what Jesus meant for us to do in this Great Commission, it is actually invitation, like come and see for yourself, right? And you have the best sort of opportunity for that among relationships of people who know you and trust you. Like, and that takes time, that kind of authenticity. And I loved what you said about going into these spaces in your community and learning again what it means to be a guest, and it's like, I had this thought of like, right, Jesus did that. Like, duh, Rachel, to myself, not you, but duh, self.
Okay, you have to clarify that though.
Duh, self. Like, we have this image, I think, of Jesus in the New Testament of like teaching and like people gathering, crowds of people and children coming near. And it's like, yeah, but also he was a guest in people's homes. Like he went out to where they were and where the need was. And I think for people that have gotten comfortable in the institutional structured church setting, like we can't expect anymore to just open the doors and people will come, or try the perfect program and that'll get them all in the door, like maybe in a particular context, but we really do need to be going back out and embodying that, sort of, being a guest, humbling ourselves again to be a guest. I love that image.
What ways have you, do you have any kind of examples you can share with us of other pastors or maybe some folks that you're coaching in the moment that have done that well? Can any of those stories come to mind that you can think of that engaged in that conversation? We the other day, my wife is also a pastor, and she was talking about, I'm the holder accountable because I'm going to talk on the podcast, so she has to do it, joining like a local pickleball club, because pickleball is all like the rave, around here. And she's like, that's when the do during my working hours is I'm going to go play pickleball. And that will be the way of getting to know my community and getting to know their needs and desires and loves. And I was like, gosh, Molly, you're right. I need to be doing that. Now, are there other examples you can share with us that maybe can help inspire us to go and to do or to try?
There are opportunities we haven't seen yet. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's see, some that come to mind. There's this really cool Tongan pastor. His name's Tulau Lolohea, and his first appointment was last year in Page, Arizona, which is like, it was a halftime appointment, right? There's a parsonage, but it's a teeny tiny like you have to drive through Navajo Nation to get there. So it's pretty remote. And so he worked halftime as a pastor and the other halftime as the football coach at the school, right? And so this is a teeny tiny church of like 25 white people. They have not had a baptism in 28 years. They had a baptism this year. They've doubled in size.
Wow.
Primarily folks that are other Pacific Islanders or Indigenous or Asian. So it's also become one of our most diverse churches because Tulau has just gone out. He's been at the football games, hanging out with people, talking to students. Now teachers are coming. And again, he's like the most humble, relatable guy you've ever met in your life, right? He's just a a guy that loves Jesus. And now people are falling in love with Jesus in Page, Arizona, because he went out and was a guest in all of these spaces, showed up at community events. And another example is Sandy Johnson. She was a second career pastor. So she was in the corporate world, and then she gets appointed to a church in Sa Juarita, Arizona. So she was a second after the planting pastor. She came in, and they had a big building, but people were not coming back post-COVID. They had a big balloon payment on their mortgage of like $1 million. And they're like, what do we do? She went out and was just a guest and volunteered everywhere. She shows up at the hospital anytime someone loses a child, and the church makes gifts to give those families. She's so active in like every community group in town, so networked, so relatable, that she realized there were a lot of adults with disabilities in the town that had no day programs. So again, she's listening, hearing about a need. They were going to start a program at a church, but she's like, well, I don't know what to do. We can't afford our mortgage anymore. They decided to sell their church building to the city to become a community rec center and a swimming pool. And they bought property that has a small house that they converted to a church that has a whole facility for, they call it Adventures with Friends. And it has a wait list already. There's like 30 adults with disabilities that are meeting there, that are worshiping with them. So their messy church is, it's a different kind of like family-oriented worship, but for them, it's primarily these adults with their parents coming. And it's just brought so much life to the community. So in a sense, they're coming to the church, but they're not. The church gave away their building and relocated to serve their neighbors and love them in a unique way. And so now they're adding an RV park. And like, so speaking of different revenue streams, right? Because all the snowbirds come out here in the winter and they want to leave their RV somewhere. You can leave it at Santa Cruz Valley UMC. So they're just doing the coolest things. And now they're getting ready to start a cafe called the Adventurers Cafe, where the community can come and eat. Because again, it's a small town. They don't really have places to gather. But it also gives a living wage to these incredible people that want a way to connect with their community. So I don't know. Those are some examples of like people who have listened and loved well, been a guest well, and then continue to create spaces for folks to feel welcome.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Wow, what a gift. People, pastors, and I would, here's one thing that just is reverberating on my mind. We're United Methodists, and particularly speaking with and listening to our podcast are probably 99% United Methodists at this point. And I will say it hasn't always been the best place to feel safe, to be genuine of who you are. Right? Hasn't always been. There's almost this part, like, if, especially for some of our folks, Rachel and I are also on the board of ordained ministry. And so we're interviewing all these candidates for ordained ministry, and we preach, hey, be yourself. But then there's also, I remember going through the process, how much do I let them know who I am at this point? Right? And then maybe when I'm ordained, I can be Rob, but until then, this is just a Rob figurehead that hopefully you'll approve of in this process. So there's this weird tightrope walking. Do you have any encouragement for those folks who may be walking that tightrope and what it could look like for them to, because it can be a scary thing to say, hey, be yourself in this community. And what we're seeing is a lot of beautiful relationships forming around that. It's when we hold ourselves back that we are unable to connect.
Yeah. And if you allow your pastor to be themselves, to go into the community and to share about their love for Jesus, and the face of your church might change. Like what the first example you shared, it's now the most diverse congregation. It started with 25 all white people, and it's like, that's such a beautiful encouragement. But at the same time, you're right. There's so many pastors who are like, yeah, but I can't go out and join the book club or pickleball or do my hobbies that I actually like because, my church wouldn't like that. They wouldn't, that you might not want to attract those people kind of thing. Right. So not to steal the question, but any tips?
I know this. Okay. So I guess my response would be more to SPRC chairs, lay leaders, and your DSs and cabinet.
Yes.
Because I think that's where the pushback comes, right? Like I tell a lot of folks I coach, you have to be bilingual in a way and speak innovation and institution fluently. Because some of the ideas I bring up to my cabinet, they're like, what? Wait, hold on. How do we have a GCFA number for fresh expressions for a state? And I'm like, we can do it, guys. Like, I've talked to the agencies, and like, where there's a will, there's a way. But you have to do your homework and help them figure out how this is being the church, even though it doesn't feel like it in that moment, right? Like how you are being faithful to your call as a clergy person by not being in your office Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, because no one's in the building. They're out in the community. So getting your DSs, getting your lay leaders, SPRC chairs to be your advocates when the pushback comes, because it will, right? Like that 6% of your church members that will not want to innovate anything at any time, or want you doing pickleball church, So they need to understand and create space for you to do this, and then really celebrate when you're able to make those authentic connections and people do feel transformed in some way. Or, I mean, it's crazy. Like some of the folks I've met will say, oh, Central UMC, which is where my family worships. My husband's a pastor there. Oh, that's our church home. They've never been there, but they know me. And so they're like, oh, Rachel's part of that church, so that's my church. So when they start hearing those stories again, so we got to be good at telling those stories, not to like put a spotlight on ourselves, but to put a spotlight on what God is doing and the new ways God is working. So then I would say the other element of that, if you are an innovator, a pastor who wants to get out there and connect with folks, but are feeling some pushback, that's where you need the podcasts like this, like you, Rachel and Rob, what you're doing. This is so life-giving, and it's so important, because people just hearing, I'm not the only one who's felt this way or struggled with this or wants to try this. That's huge, right? And why not start now? And there's this freedom that comes from being who you are, and the world will pick up on that, right? Like, I have never played pickleball ever, nor do I have a desire. So if I tried to go out there just to invite them to church, they would see it and it would flop, right? Like, I am not a gamer. I've never been on Twitch, so I can respect what Nathan Webb's doing at Checkpoint Church, but that is not my jam. Like, I'm hanging out with college students and return Peace Corps volunteers making pasta from scratch, right? Like, that's what I do. So know who you are, know who your allies are, and advocate for yourself from the institution, knowing that maybe it won't change as quickly as you want it to, but if you could, just every little step is a step in the right direction, I guess,
Yeah. Oh, that sense of authenticity, right? Of like, you started with this, hey, this has been hard, rest, take care of yourself. Like, there's this thread of self-care, like, to know yourself, you have to love yourself and take care of yourself and advocate for yourself, right? Of like, that's who God has called. You in your full self to authentically follow Jesus. And that takes a lot of courage. But that's what we've been called to do, and to feel like we have the freedom by the people we're surrounded by, to live that out is hopeful for me. It's beautiful.
That's good.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we do know, we just came out of a meeting, an operational team, Rachel and I, and they were talking about, they went on this residency retreat, some of our residences, and this podcast was brought up. Deeply humbling.
Oh.
I know. And it quoted maybe several times in commissioning paperwork. I don't know. No, not me. Our excellent guests that we have on here. But there is hopefully some permission giving from us who are representatives of the board to say, we want you. And by that, we want all of you.
We want you to be yourself.
Yeah. You don't have to put on that mask or that suit and tie or whatever it may look like when you go in the room, and that's all who you are, if that's not who you are outside of this room, right? So hopefully, hey, RIM folks who are watching this and streaming this, hey, we do want all of you. So hopefully they hear that as a permission giving as well. I remember we're about to start something, local church pastor here at Watkins. And I brought it up to my lead team the other night. We just went to the lead team from a multi-SPRC trustees, and man, we maybe need to do an episode on transitioning leadership teams, because that has been such a gift for me not to be out every night of the week in admin meetings. But I brought up one of those fresh expressions ideas I had, and I wanted their permission first before I go outside of that room, because it does have to do with alcohol. So I'm going to start a Pints and Parables here in Louisville, and I'm pretty pumped about it, but I wanted to know, hey, let's take a temperature. Let's see is this going to make anybody mad? Is anybody going to leave over this? I know it's a sensitive subject. And I was just just so proud of my leadership team being like, hey, go for it. Try it. And if it fails, it fails. That's all right. Go. If we lose some people, hey, I don't think they're really meant to be here to be from the beginning. And just the amount of people that you can reach out there. God, I shared a story. I started a similar type gathering in my first appointment out of Duke in Melbourne, Florida. And I became like best friends with the bartender at this place called Pizza Gallery. Pizza Gallery is part art gallery, pizza parlor, and pub. It was awesome.
That's cool.
But that group that met on Sunday afternoons was the only church group that most of these bartenders knew. And so they would start coming with what we would call prayer requests. Like they call me Father or Rev or something. At that point, I don't think I was either of those. But it was really cool to be that like representative. And to me, that was so deeply formational. And so my encouragement to others is to try it. Yes, go through some streams of permission giving from the folks. Take the temperature. I love the 6%. I think is attainable for most places, right? And give it a shot.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
that's cool.
What are some of the current trends or innovations that you see in church planning at this point? Rachel, where is it heading towards? I know we almost poo-pooed the idea on parachute dropping, right? Like, maybe don't do that because that's assuming we know the community far more than we ever could. We see a lot of those. But what are some of the current trends heading towards?
Yeah, great question. So after being like, don't do a parachute drop, it has the highest failure rate, which is true. It's actually been the most common type of church plant we've seen in Methodism in the last couple of years, but it's for a good reason, right? If you have a town where there were a lot of disaffiliations, but some remnant folks remain, I don't really call it a parachute drop because you're really starting with a ready to go launch team. So we're seeing a ton of new churches spring up where actually we haven't had any official disaffiliations in the desert Southwest. Isn't that weird? We're the only annual conference still with none, but we did have one church where the pastor and everyone left and went to the Elks Lodge to do worship in the way they felt called to. And that was great. And we brought in a planter and this happened in like November, December, right? And they're already worshiping more than the number that left a few months ago. So, so we're seeing, they're called lighthouse churches that are kind of popping up in these spaces where there's a need. So that's one big type. We're also seeing a lot of cooperative parish style church plants coming together. I'm speaking about like my context, some of the projects I'm super excited about. So there's one, Mission Insight is our best friend. And you can do opportunity scans that tell you where in your community they really need another church. So when I scanned our districts, I found that the North District, Vegas area needed one. So I called the DS and I'm like, okay, let's do something. Let's get into some holy mischief. And he's like, do you know they call Las Vegas the ninth island? And I was like, what does that mean? So I'm Googling it. Pacific Islanders have increased by 40% in the last 10 years in the Vegas area. Like 1 in 10 Hawaiians visits Vegas at least once a year on vacation. And so we bought a $2 million Lutheran church building because we found that we had 3 unchartered church plants. That had been in existence for like over a decade that had never had a building of their own. And so one was Tongan, one Samoan, and one's Filipino American. So we bought this building and it's called Pacifica, Pasifika, which represents all the islands in diaspora and that touch the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. Anyways, they're all working together and like they're selling food from their culture. They worship in different languages on a Sunday, just share the space. They're leasing the space for like Polynesian dance troops and they're starting a quilting business. So it's really inspiring culture. I actually got a text this morning from General Conference that there's a Fijian group of Methodists that want to come into Pacifica and be a part of what's doing. So we're seeing lots of different groups working together now so that, again, we can learn from each other, but also as we're seeking to be more diverse as a denomination, how do we do it if we don't elevate leaders that are more diverse too, right? And empower them to have the resources. And similarly, we're hoping to buy a bunch of food trucks to offer Messy Church in Spanish, written by Spanish speakers instead of just translated from English, to be a mobile Messy Church in our Hispanic Latino neighborhoods and bring snow cone trucks everywhere, right? So people run out and learn. So we're seeing different cooperative parishes where folks are sharing space and working together. nationally too, more of these spiritual entrepreneurships like snow cone trucks, food trucks, catering businesses, and a lot of digital churches. So we're going to have our first digital church planter again in the Vegas area. I'm just doing a lot up there, who has about 200 people in her Facebook community with like 180 active on a weekly basis. So more online ministries, more businesses that go out to the community and offer faith resources, and then more folks working alongside each other, using buildings primarily as a way to generate revenue for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It's really great.
That is, yeah.
Can you just describe what Messy Church is just briefly for us? Because we've dropped it a few times here, and I think it would be really helpful for our audience to hear just a snippet about what Messy Church is.
Love it. So Messy Church is a type of fresh expression. So fresh expression started in the early 2000s, around 2004, in Great Britain, when the British Methodist, Salvation Army, Church of England came together and said, where is everybody? So Europe's a little bit ahead of us. So we lean to them in terms of innovation. So they birthed Fresh Expressions, which is where you go out. It's mainly lay-led. It's outside of the church building. And you don't expect that anyone that ever comes to whatever you're doing outside of the church will be a member inside of the church. So those are kind of your three main defining characteristics. Messy Church is a style of a fresh expression. You can go online to Messy Church USA or Messy Church UK and pay like $3, $15. It's not a lot of money to download a full curriculum that has the kind of food to serve, 14 different crafts to choose from, all around a central scriptural theme, so that families can engage in intergenerational worship together, with music, with a meal, and with crafts that help them literally live out the scripture lesson for that day. So it's really cool. It's in like 20 countries now. But as I said, they've had Messy Churches translated into Spanish, but it's never been written by folks from the Hispanic Latino community. So actually our annual conference is partnering with Messy Church USA this year to offer a whole variety of those resources as well for those that want to do ministry in that context. But yeah, so Messy Church is just messy. It's glittery, it's gluey, kids are running around. There's usually bounce houses, Lego tables. But it's a great way to reach new people in new ways. And that is something that you could host at the church, but it usually works best if it's on the church lawn or a park or somewhere else in the community. So
yeah,
really cool. Thanks for describing that. I think hopefully there's somebody listening. Hey, my church I can do that, right? I have a leadership team I can assemble to meet those persons of peace in my neighborhood and try to figure out what this could do. Really, really neat. I'm glad you explained that for us.
Yeah.
What's your hope for the future of the church as we end our conversation today? What big dreams or hopes do you have? And this could be the United Methodist Church. This could be the Big C Church in general. What's your hopes or dreams for?
I guess my hope is that, the last few years have been hard, really hard, right? So that the worst is behind us, right? That we can move forward and do new things in new ways and not feel like, I'm reminded of the Psalms, right? Where God's people were crying out in Babylon saying like, why, everything's changed. Nothing's the same. Like, how can we worship God in a foreign land? And the world is different and it feels strange, but I guess my hope is that of Jeremiah's, that we put down roots, that we build houses, that we plant fields, that we say everything about the world has kind of changed in some form or fashion. And yet God has been waiting for us to get here. And so we're not alone. And so this is maybe our finest moment in hour to throw off the old way of doing things and embrace the best of our tradition to a world that so desperately needs it. One of my favorite quotes from Yaroslav Pelikan is, tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And I think we've had too much traditionalism in our churches where we do things because that's the way we've always done it, instead of really holding on to this true, vibrant, living faith of those who have passed on and sharing it in new ways.
Oh, that's so
yeah, that's beautiful. Well, and so much has changed, yes, and yet still we are still people called to be in community, and folks are hungering for that in a way that we've missed out on lots and lots of years, right? Like there's almost this there's this opportunity. We just have to adapt a little bit and connect, right? Of people still desire to do life together, right? It's just outside of the church often.
Yeah. And I like it. God is waiting for you there. Right. I think you said a phrase like that just a few minutes ago. And I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where have you been? Almost. It's like the people have been there, their longings, their desires, their hopes.
Yeah.
And God is waiting there
Yeah.
for us to say, are you going to get on board? You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus is kind of ahead of us waiting. Come on, follow. Let's go.
So
Yeah.
good. Well,
Wow.
thank you so much, Rachel, for being with us, both Rachels.
Oh, you're
Okay.
welcome.
But
Yes.
especially this Rachel today. So glad you spent some time. I've loved getting to know your story and your hopes and your dreams. And this has been deeply inspiring for me and hopefully for the rest of our listeners as well. Every episode, we end with the thing called the Holy Roast. And so this is, we have stolen this or borrowed this, whatever ideas,
Yeah.
whatever language
I didn't
you
tell
want.
you about this, Rachel. Sorry.
Well, that's a good thing. But every episode we end with a couple of rapid fire questions. So please just, whatever comes first to your mind, come on out. You don't have to give us an elaborate answer, but if there's a good story, you can include it. But here's a couple questions for you. First thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's go. What are you reading right now?
Ooh, Adam Grant, Hidden Potential and Trauma-Informed Evangelism by Elaine Heath.
Ooh,
That's so
Elaine
good.
Heath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to read that one. Yeah. What's keeping you alive right now?
My kids, I love them so much. And they're teenagers and they don't hate me and they talk to me about their life. And so I feel like if I'm doing nothing else well, at least I'm a relatable mom. So,
I love that. What are 5 things on your nightstand currently?
a bottle of water. I live in the desert. A hair tie, a book, my cell phone charger, and usually my AirPods. But I have them for now.
Yeah.
Good job. What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
So, I have like a game on my iPad. I don't even know what it's called. Like I match things in a pile. I don't know. It's meaningless. But I feel as a 3, I've accomplished something in under a minute and a half when I can match all the things on the screen. I feel like I'm already trying to stave off dementia or something. But no, that's how I'm alive.
That's good. So you're called up to bat. You've made it to the major leagues. What is your walk-up song? What's playing behind as you approach it with that bat?
Beyonce, Who Runs the World.
Oh, yes.
Girls.
Yes.
Good.
I
Yeah.
love it. Oh, best one yet.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a ton of fun, and we'll make sure we link in the comments some of the things that you've talked about, some of the
Yes.
books and resources, because I think some of this has been so applicable to so many different contexts, particularly within the Kentucky Conference and outside of it, that we should be looking into. And this has been so enjoyable. I'm looking forward to my invite to the retreat coming up at some point, and we'll be awaiting that. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the invite. Keep doing incredible work. We're so grateful for you.
It's good to see
Right.
you. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.